Hello everybody and welcome to this lake landscape acrylic painting for beginners and intermediate painters. In the tutorial we're going to teach you how to mix realistic colours, how to use those colours and different types of brushes to create trees and woods, how to paint and block in water to make it look really realistic, how to paint reflections and ripples in your water, and lastly how to paint water sparkles to create a really realistic landscape painting. So for my lake painting I drew an outline in pencil, and when I was happy with it I went over the pencil with cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. I used the ultramarine blue just on sort of the areas in the foreground to make them darker, and I used the cerulean blue in the far off background where we're going to have far off trees and rocks and things like that. The reason I did that is just because I find it so much easier to have an outline when I'm painting and I know where everything's going to be. When I was happy with it, I dried my painting with a hairdryer just so it won't smudge. So we're going to have this far off hedge line and forest in the background, which I'm going to teach you how to use colour to push back. We're going to have some ripples and some reflections either side. Now here's an image of the canvas and the outline. If you'd like to copy it and pause the video, feel free to do so. So now we've got our outline, the first thing we're going to do is block in our tree line. So we're going to get some burnt umber brown, some sap green to create sort of a tree colour. We're going to add ultramarine blue, and we're going to add light grey. Now light grey is just white and a little bit of black, and we're going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue. And the reason we're adding blue and grey to our sort of tree colour of sap green and brown is to push these tree lines back. By using blue and lighter grey, we're making this shadow colour very light to make it look like it's far off into the distance. And now that I've got my outline, it's so much easier, look, just to colour in, think of a colouring in book. It's so much easier to block in that shape. Now the light's going to be coming down from the middle, so we're going to make the middle a little bit lighter. So by adding more light grey, we can just do that to our colour. We can add more of the ultramarine blue, which makes it less saturated, and we can just block in this sort of bush that looks like it's got sort of getting bleached in the sun, and we can kind of use this colour to just soften up our edges. So if you imagine the sun is hitting these edges of our trees, and I can make them a little bit more spiky and tree-like just using the tip and the edge of my brush. And then if we get that darker colour that we just used and we mixed up, we can use that to block in this shape here, because I want the light to be coming straight down the middle, so either side will be getting slightly less light, so it'll be getting gradually darker. Now because this area is closer to the viewer, as it gets closer to the viewer it gets darker. So if you imagine the sun's coming through and this area is going to be more in the shade, and that area on the right is going to be far off into the distance. So to achieve this, what we do is we mix our tree colour, which was sap green, burnt umber brown and ultramarine blue. We add our little bit of light grey, but not so much this time, so it's still very dark. And all we're going to do, look, is just block in this area. And what it should do, if we just gradually blend into the previous colour while it's wet, it should look like this area is a little bit closer to the viewer. And that's what we're trying to achieve. Now the far corner will be very dark, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit of black, just a tiny bit, and I'm just going to darken up this left hand corner. Now black really absorbs all colours, so you only need a little bit of black, okay? Because we don't want to make it too dark. Now with the same colour, look, we can texturize this area, so we can put in some shadows, and all I'm doing, look, I'm leaving gaps and I'm just creating rough shapes of bushes by using some of that dark colour just to create some texture on my trees. Super easy, really easy technique. Now I got a bit excited and forgot to block in an area here, so all I'm going to do is really no problem. I can just mix some of the same colour as that far off tree, and then I can just block in this area to all matches. I can even look slightly blend it just so it looks more natural, and then I can sort of do the same here with this tree line, just so everything looks really lovely. All my transitions kind of match. It's all blended. Now we're going to work on the sky. So please dry your painting because we don't want our trees to mix with our sky. So once your canvas is dry, just get some white and some cerulean blue and just add a tiny bit of cerulean blue to the white to make it a really, really pastel whitey blue, and just block in this whole area in that color. You don't have to blend or mix anything. The great thing is if your canvas is dry, it won't mix with your green trees. So I always dry my canvas all the time in between stages, and then it makes everything easier. So this is a cool trick. We're going to get some more cerulean blue and add it to our white to get a lovely pastel cerulean blue. So look, we're just getting a pastel color. We're going to swap to one of these sort of house brushes that Bob Ross uses all the time. We're going to load up our paintbrush and we're going to gently sort of stab our painting, sort of push towards it. And then we're going to create a rough outline going around our trees. So all I'm doing is I'm pushing down with this textured brush around the edge of my tree line. And this should create the illusion of our trees fading off into the distance to create perspective. So once you're happy with that and you've gone round your trees, the great thing is, look, you can get a baby wipe and just wipe away your actual tree line and it should look really nice and neat. The great thing is your painting's still dry underneath, and then look, you've got this nice clean border going around it now with the blue, and it just looks like it's fading off. So now we're going to texturize our trees. So let's make some of the color up again. So let's get some ultramarine blue, some sap green, and some burnt umber brown. We're going to add some of our light grey to get the same sort of color that we had of our background that we blocked in earlier. And then what we're going to do, we're going to mix 3 different shades. So we're going to get orange, because it's kind of autumn time, and we're going to add that to one area of the mix. We're going to get some light green. Let's get some light green and add that to some area of the mix to get sort of a pastel green. And then let's get some cad yellow and do the same. Now the problem with cad yellow, look, and adding it to this color, it just goes murky. So you need to add a lot of cad yellow to it to get an actual hint of the color. And if it still looks a little bit murky, you can always add a little bit of the light grey just to make it more natural, and we should get a nice sort of autumn yellow color. So we've got our 3 colors, and look, you can just get your brush and just go between the 3 shades and texturize the area. So it's very, very easy. Whoa, I'm holding onto my canvas. So I've done some orange. Look, I can get some green, and I'm just kind of using the edge of the brush and the bristles to create the shapes of trees. And by using these kind of autumn colors, mixing between the yellows, the greens and the orange, I can just kind of work on different shades. I can use that sharp edges of the bristles to just create sort of a rough border. And if you want to, look, you can swap back to a small brush to make finer details. Look, you can add more colors. So I'm just adding more orange and white to the mix. It's autumn at the moment. It's really, really pretty. You've got all the sort of rusty sort of leaves dropping. So I'm just using the same sort of colors. And I'm just using a smaller brush. Look, I can add yellow to the mix and white, or even my light grey. The great thing about light grey is it kind of sucks out the vibrancy of colors. When you first use acrylic paints, they're very, very bright. So if you don't want your work to look really cartoony, what you can do is, so look, this green is really, really bright. So sometimes it's a bit too loud. It's okay to have some odd highlights, but by using light greys and browns, you can suck a bit of the color out. So I'm just mixing green, brown, and ultramarine blue, and light grey to suck a bit of the color out. You can make everything look more natural. And all I'm doing, look, I'm just texturizing that area, making it a little bit darker, because this area is going to be a bit more in the shade than the far off middle section that is going to be more in the light. So but just making this bit darker, it just looks more natural. And then it kind of looks like it's fading away as it gets towards the middle. So we've got darker in the one corner, lighter in the middle. Same on this one. And now we can add some proper highlights. So let's get some bright cad orange and mix it into our gooey mix, which was just, remember, sap green, ultramarine blue, light grey and brown. We can get our big Bob Ross brush. And look, we can just stab our painting, like, give it some welly, give it some action, look. And just create the illusion of texture. That's the great thing about painting. You don't have to be like really, really gentle. You can proper have a go. We get some green now into the mix. And again, look, it's quite muted because we've got some of that light grey in. Mix it in with the orange. So it's up to you. Look, you can go as textured as you like. Let's get some yellow. Just thought I would do lots of different colours just to show you. Let's add yellow and green, why not? To make lime green. Let's add some white to make it really bright. Look, lime green with white. And look, you can use that brush and just create loads of just different shapes of bushes and branches. It's really, really cool. And what it does as well, it just makes it more realistic. You've got areas that are muted because they're in the shade, and you've got areas that are in the sun that are getting sort of highlighted. So by having a different sort of variation, it's really, really cool. And as I say, look, once you've used that big brush, you can always get a smaller brush and just put in odd leaves that are getting hit, odd bushes and things that are getting hit by the light. So they're getting much more light on them, so they're more vibrant. So I'm just going in between the colours. I've got some orange and white now. So I've got a muted orange. And I'm just putting a sort of light colour. I just wanted everything to look like fall, like autumn. So I'm just putting hints here on the left hand side. But I'm trying to use warmer colours such as orange and white and yellow and white on the middle area, because that's what would be glowing in the sun. So if you think if the sun's coming down from the middle, all these sort of areas would be getting a hint of colour, a hint of light, but not too much. So to emphasize that, look, I can get white and orange and a little bit of light grey to make it muted. I don't want it too vibrant off into the distance because I want it to look far off. So by having some grey in there and not too bright a colour, look, it just makes it look far off into the distance. And then because we've done so much texturizing, we're just going to mix some of our shadow colour that we did originally. So it was ultramarine blue, sap green, burnt umber and light grey. And all we're going to do, look, we're just going to block in just texture in between all our highlights. And that's to make it look like yin and yang between highlights and shadows. And then remember, as we move more to the left, we're going to get darker. So we're going to add a little bit of black to that mix to make it even darker. But same core colours, ultramarine blue, raw, burnt umber brown, sap green and light grey. But now with a hint of black. And then look, we're just doing the same technique. I'm just using a small brush. I'm just putting little bits of shadows and texture just to make my bushes and my forest kind of look darker. I'm just adding more black now as I move towards the left because this area is going to be much more in the shade. And I can start putting much harsher shadows. So these are the areas that are barely getting any light. And we can start putting things in like our tree trunks and start blocking in our rocks in a minute. So let's get a flat brush and let's draw some tree trunks. So that's really easy to do. Look, we just get a flat brush and just get some black and just put some lines going straight down. And then as we come towards the middle, I'm just going to use the lighter shade and use the darker shade on the left. So look, remember, if you go towards the middle, don't go too dark because we want it to look like the shadow is on the left. And the ones here in the middle are much more lighter. So add a little bit of white to your colour. And then look, if you go too gung-ho with your trees, look, you can always paint some leaves over the top to push them back again. So there's nothing set in stone. The great thing with acrylics and painting in general, it's not linear. It's not like ABC where you have to do something in a row. You can go back and forth to areas. So let's just get some of the sky colour and a small brush, and let's just poke some sky holes just ever so slightly, and then I can rub them with my finger, and these are just gaps in between some of the trees to make it look more realistic. So look, all I'm doing is just poking some holes in between some of the leaves, and then I'm just going to get my finger and smudge them just so they're not as harsh, and it just makes it look more realistic. And there we have it. And then let's just get some black and just block in our rocks. So now as we're getting closer, all our shadows are getting darker. So by using our darkest darks now in the foreground, it brings things closer towards you. So now by having things like black and things now coming towards us, can you see it pushes our trees back? Look, it pushes them back. So now we're going to start blocking in our rocks. So if you paint it black and then just add some grey, add a little bit more black to your grey just to make it a little bit darker. And then once it's dry, look, you can just paint the shape of pebbles and rocks. So the secret is let your black dry, and then use a smaller brush, and then just go over the top and just create the illusion of rocks. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just creating the illusion of little circles with a small brush, and it makes it look like lots of pebbles and rocks just on our riverbank. Really easy. And then look, I can go back. I'm being a bit pedantic. I forgot it was a tutorial for beginners and intermediate people. And I went back and did too much extra bits. Just adding some brighter highlights just here where the sun would be shining on it. I can't help myself. I'm very sorry. I always just do extra bits. That is the pains of being an artist. You're a bit OCD. And there's things that bug you. And you'll go back and forth. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how you become a good artist, because self-critiquing and working on yourself and going back and forth will make you a better painter. So this is now all dry. So let's paint some water. So let's get some white and cerulean blue. So white and cerulean blue. And then we're going to add some light grey to make it look a bit manky, more like pond or lake water. So by adding some light grey, look, it sucks a bit of the colour out and doesn't make it look as cartoony. And then what we're going to do is all down this middle shape that we created our outline in, we're just going to colour in. So really, really easy. You can use a big brush. Don't worry if it's a bit scruffy, because we can paint over areas. We just want to block all this in a nice bright sort of pastel blue. So we'll come right down to the bottom of our painting. Now, if you're finding the tutorial helpful and you're finding all these tips really useful with the brushes and the colours and all these bits, we have a playlist on how to paint water. We have things like how to paint these beautiful water lilies. We have how to paint waves, how to paint realistic water. Now, this water, it gets darker as it moves away from the light. So we're just going to add some ultramarine blue to the mix. To make it darker, we're going to add a tiny bit of pink just to turn it a bit more purple. You can add red if you don't have pink at home, and just a bit more ultramarine blue and grey. So we're just turning it a bit more purpley, and then we're just going to shade the bottom just to make it look a bit darker away from the light, just really gently, and just blending that in as we go up into the painting. Yeah, so please like and subscribe. And please go and check out the How to Paint Water playlist, because I think it will massively help you all. It's got literally, I think, about 100 videos on how to paint water, how to paint waves, different brush techniques, different colours, mixing that will really, really help you if you want to get better at landscape painting. So now we're going to learn how to paint water reflections either side. So we're going to mix up the shadow colour. We're going to add some burnt umber to the mix we just made, which was white and ultramarine blue. And we're going to add some yellow just to make sort of a lighter colour, and some white and some more grey. So we're just trying to make a sort of a mustardy colour. So by adding greys, sort of yellows and browns, we can create this sort of murky sort of mustard colour. Yellow and purple is a way to kind of make this sort of colour as well. And all we're going to do, we're just going to create some rough shapes of some ripples. So just sort of these areas, these are the areas that are sort of cascading into different colours. A lot of this we're going to go over, but what we're going to do, we're just going to block it in first and sort of figure out our way out. Because as I say, a lot of things with painting is intuitive. So let's get some orange and add it to the mix and make a same colour for our orange ripples. So a lot of painting is intuitive. So a lot of the more you do painting and the more you practice, it's like Neo from the Matrix. You'll create neurons in your brain and pathways, and you'll just be able to do things automatically. So think of driving, any of you who drive, you can literally drive on automatic pilot because you've done it so often. It's like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth. So the more you paint, the more you can become like that. And I find sometimes when especially when I'm doing these tutorials, because I'm pressing that camera and doing bits and bobs, I'm just mixing some of that shadow colour up that we've made so many times, which is ultramarine blue, green and brown, and a little bit of the light grey. Yeah, because I'm in two minds, because I'm trying to press a camera and focus it and paint. Sometimes I don't flow when I'm painting and I get a bit self-conscious, and it takes me out of what I call the flow state. I don't know if any of you have heard this. Now, the flow state is when you do your best work, because it's when you relax and you just let things flow. And it's almost like you lose all sense of time and you lose all sense of yourself, and you in your creation kind of merge together and you just have fun. And it's like a runner's high, as they call it. So all I'm doing now, I'm just getting a small brush and I'm just going around some of the ripples with a slightly darker colour. So I've just added a little more ultramarine blue to the mix. So I hope you guys watching at home are all enjoying the tutorial, and I hope you get into the flow state. Leave me a comment if you know what I'm talking about, where there's certain things you do that you really enjoy and time seems to just disappear. Sometimes it could be meeting up with friends. Like sometimes you have friends that you haven't seen for so long, and literally, even though you haven't seen them for years, you get in each other's presence and it's literally like hours fly by like minutes, and it's like you were talking to them like you were talking to them yesterday, like nothing's changed. So there's lots of experiences where you experience this sort of time shift, which is really cool. So leave me a comment if it's painting for you or something else, because it's really cool to find out what people are into. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just going around my riverbank and some of my ripples with this darker colour. I'm kind of using just different shades of it to go around the ripples, some dark, some light, because I'm kind of just trying to figure it out, trying to make everything kind of smooth. Water's really rounded and feminine, so I don't want any sharp corners. I don't want any really like sharp angles or lines. I want everything to be rounded and curvy. So by just using a small brush, it's so much easier to just create sort of ripples and sort of these rounded shapes. Look, I can just go round areas and sort of figure it out. But I was kind of struggling because I was kind of debating where to do the ripples like this or to do it how I'm going to do it. So I got a flat brush and sort of changed tact halfway through, because a flat brush is really flat and it's really straight. So by using a fan brush, I can sort of cover a lot of ground. I can kind of shade areas. And because we've got these different sort of texture underneath, we've got some dark areas, some light areas, I can sort of go over bits and sort of try to make it more realistic. So because it's looking a bit cartoony, unfortunately with painting, sometimes your work will look a bit rubbish till about 90% of the time, and that's why a lot of people give up. If you ever think with these tutorials, it's not till the final bit, this is all dry now, it's not till the final bit that it starts to look really realistic. So I'm going to get some phthalo blue, which is a different kind of blue, it's a bit more turquoisey, so phthalo blue, and I'm going to get some grey, and mix it into my phthalo blue. And I'm just going to go round my ripples. Now, if you haven't got phthalo blue at home, you can mix a little bit of, like, I would mix a tiny bit of burnt umber brown into blue. So if you've got a blue at home and it's not, it's quite bright, add a little bit of brown to it and it will kind of create a more grey tone. And by using this kind of grey blue, all we're going to do is we're going to kind of link these two areas together. Because I think with our ripples, to make them look realistic, we don't want too much of a jump in the transitions. We want to kind of link these two areas together. So you go from the really darks to the really brights. So if we put on all our darks first before we put on all our sparkles and highlights on our water, we can kind of emphasize that. So by using this nice cool grey blue, we can just link areas. We can kind of shade the bottom of our painting where it's getting less light. So I can shade at the very edge. And then I can mix a bit of our shadow colour into it to make it even more murky. So it turns it more grey. And I can kind of glaze this area. Now this canvas is totally dry. So even though we've just spent 5 minutes doing those ripples, I'm colouring them in. And don't worry, even though you kind of go, oh, well, I've just done that. Well, sometimes in painting that happens. Sometimes in painting you have areas that it just doesn't work, or you could do it better by doing a different technique. And I kind of think for all the ripples, it's easier if I just shade over the top. It's still got the texture underneath and it's still got the different colours. It just won't be too noticeable till I go over them again. So I think if I just sort of shade them in very lightly, you still see hints of the yellow and the orange. But I think if I shade it to be more natural, a bit like our tree line, we don't want really, really jumps. And the problem when you're doing things in the foreground, it's a lot darker than things in the background. So trying to create that balance, we don't have too much of a jumping shades and colours and values. So let's get some of that bright yellow and green. And I was going to put a reflection over the top now. Now we've kind of shaded this area in. So I can use some of that yellow, green and white just to create sort of a rough sort of ripples. So if I kind of block it in and leave it to dry, I can come back to it. So I'm just going to sort of block this area in. And I'm going to do the same with some orange. I'm just going to kind of put a rough sort of scruffy version, and then I'll go over the top in a minute. So look, we've got our ripples now. Our water is not so dark that it's jumping from the blue now. It's kind of mixing all together now. It's kind of working. Because it looks more natural, we can make it more 3D now. So I'm going to get some black, some sap green, some burnt umber brown and some ultramarine blue. No light grey this time. And I've got a really sharp brush. Because our ripples are kind of blurred now, I can make areas really dark. I can make certain lines and ripples really, really harsh in the foreground. The reason I'm going to make some of them really dark is because once they're dry, we can get brighter colours like our trees, and we can put highlights over the top. And I kind of need a dark background for my bright highlights to stand out. So I'm just making some of the ripples more 3D by going around them. I'm putting some sharp ripples in the middle, and I'm just making some areas very dark. Things like underneath the rocks, look, there'd be a big shadow cast there. So let's put some really dark shade in there, make it look more 3D. And here in the foreground, just to bring the ripples closer to the viewer. And then when we're happy with it, we can try to put some ripples on. Because it's still wet, look, it will just look rubbish. Look, my camera's a bit out of focus. We're having a bit of a whinge. Look, it just doesn't look good. So why don't we take a little 2-second break? We'll let it dry. We'll let all this area dry. And we'll work on the shimmer. So let's get a clean brush. Let's get some white and blue. And let's make a really light pastel white and blue. And let's come down from the middle on a dry canvas. So my canvas is totally dry, so I can't get some of that green on my brush. And I'm just going to shade as we come down. And it's going to look like light, coming through the trees. Look, we can even put some through the trees and cascading onto the water. And I can even add, look, some more white to my mix and just make it a little bit brighter and sort of shimmer it down and sort of blur it out with my fingers so it just looks really natural. So look, I can just thicken it up with some more of that white and blue and just sort of shimmer it down. So let's have sort of the shimmer coming down like this between the ripples. Let's have some bits coming either side. And then I can get some of that phthalo blue that we mixed up earlier and just sort of go around my ripples now. Now they're all dark, and just put that back in. So a lot of it is just going back and forth, just working on areas, having no big jumps, making everything look natural. Just feeling your way out. I can even get some of that pastel white and blue. And look, put some ripples in with that colour. Look, just some little circles, little sort of squash semicircles. Look at that. Starting to work now. Look, it's all starting to come together. So look, if I'd given up and I'd got moody, sometimes it's good to just take a 5-minute break. Go take your dog a walk or go make yourself a cup of tea. And then come back to it when you've got a nicer frame of mind. So look, I start shading all this area with my blue. Starting to look really realistic now. And then now, let's just get pure white and a clean brush. And let's start doing some water sparkles. So we're going to paint water sparkles by just pushing down. The canvas is totally dry. As I keep saying, I always dry my painting every stage of the way. So if I make a mistake, I can just get a baby wipe and wipe it away. So what I tend to do is just before I did the water sparkles here, I just dried my painting, and then now the painting is totally dry. I've got a clean brush. All I've got is pure titanium white out of the tube. I've created some sparkles around my rocks on the shoreline. Can even have some on the rocks where the water's sort of cascading up. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to work our way from the middle down and sort of come out, and I'm just dabbing my round-headed brush to create some splodges to make it look like a blurry effect, that this light is kind of off into the distance, and it kind of gives it that sort of cinematic effect that you get on your iPhones. So it kind of creates this really sort of out of focus look. And then now my canvas is dry. Look, my ripples is so much easier. We should have done this from the start, shouldn't we, Murray? And we could just go over it, and we can even look, curl them round to the shape of the ripples that we've now set. So look, I can go round the darkened outlines. It makes everything look blurry. We should have done this from the start, so sorry. But as I say, with painting, sometimes it's not linear. Sometimes you do make mistakes. Sometimes you do have to go back and forth. That is just the way it works. And it's not a bad thing. I keep trying to say that to you. Sometimes your work will come out better than you can ever believe from just going back to it when you have a clear head and just relaxing. So look, now I'm really happy. I can just add these white water sparkles. I'm totally in the flow zone now. I'm literally gone. And I've got my music blaring, and I'm just away with the fairies, and I'm just going at it with my water sparkles. Just really enjoying myself. And that's the whole point. I really, really hope you, find painting does that with you. So now I'm out my head. I'm just relaxing. Now the thing with your water sparkles, if you want to make them more vibrant, dry your painting and go over them again, because then the whites will look more white, because sometimes when you lay the white, it will absorb some of the blue underneath and it won't look as vibrant. It will look really nice when you first paint it, but it will dry a bit flat. So if you notice that when your painting dries, just literally go over your sparkles with pure titanium white again. And then I can just get some grey and blue, and I can just create some ripples from my rocks just to match them. If I've got any bits like the tree line looks a bit scruffy, look, I can just neaten it up. And as I say, with the water sparkles, look, I can give them a second coat of paint and then they look much nicer. So look at that, it looks hyper realistic. So we got there in the end, we stuck there on an easel, we've signed her. So you've got this lovely tree line that you've got pushed back that you've learned how to do with a big brush and different texture. You've got the lovely glow with the lovely cerulean blue to make it look pushed off into the distance. You've learned how to bring things forward with darker colours to make it look like it's in the foreground. You've learned how to paint the ripples and how to paint water reflections in acrylic paints. And then lastly, how to paint water sparkles and then how to blend it to make it look more realistic and to lighten and darken your ripples to have darks in the foreground and sparkles in the background. So hyper realistic acrylic painting. I hope you've enjoyed it. We have, as I say, over 200 landscape painting tutorials on the channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe. And please check out the playlists that we have, because there's lots of useful tips and techniques on landscape painting for acrylic painters, for beginners and intermediate painters. So happy painting, everyone. Take care and see you soon. See you. Bye.